Floodwaters in the Llano River began receding Wednesday after cresting at nearly 40 feet the day before. Flooding forced residents to evacuate and caused a bridge to collapse. At least 2 people died. CBS News correspondent Mark Strassman has more.
Central Texas has so much floodwater with no place to go. The Llano River still roaring and still causing havoc to communities. At least 2 deaths have been blamed on the floodwaters. We came across a rescue team who found 2 men trapped in their submerged SUV, nose down in a street that had washed away. One of dozens of rescues over the last couple of days.
North of the border tonight, recreational marijuana is now legal across Canada, and it comes not without controversy. Can Americans bring some of that marijuana back over the border? ABC's Gio Benitez in Montreal tonight.
They started lining up before dawn, down the street, around the block, thousands of Canadians waiting hours to buy marijuana.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
As the day went on, the lines grew longer, Canadian flags unfurled, the country now one of only 2 in the world to legalize recreational pot.
It's pretty cool, actually. It's like coming out of a prohibition. So that's why we're here, because it's such a big moment.
Yes, there are detractors. The Canadian Medical Association Journal calls it all an uncontrolled experiment, putting money above the health of Canadians. But Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who campaigned on a promise to legalize, today tweeted that regulating pot means profits out of the hands of criminals, protection for our kids. It could also mean an estimated $400 million in tax revenues.
Cannabis is legal in Canada, and everybody should come to Canada and enjoy our cannabis.
Big news north of the border tonight. Gio is in Montreal for us. And Gio, a lot of people back here at home likely asking, can you bring some of that marijuana back across the border? Is that legal?
Oh, Canada is now saying, oh, cannabis. Our neighbors to the north legalizing recreational marijuana. Canada now the largest nation in the world to do that. Here in the United States, just 9 states allow it, but with the midterms around the corner, this is a major issue on the ballot in Michigan and North Dakota. So is nationwide pot legalization in America's future as well? Joining us right now, our former police officer, Joe Peters, who served in the White House Drug Czar's office, screen left, and Michael Caridi, the chairman of the Tree of Knowledge. Guys, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Okay, so the big question is it a good idea, Joe, we'll start with you, to legalize pot nationwide here in the United States? Canada just did it.
Quick answer is no, and I think we'll be sorry. Fortunately, we have a crystal ball in this case because we can look 5 years later at what happened in Colorado, for instance, which legalized marijuana.
What happened in Colorado?
By every metric, it was a failure, in my view. Teen drug use is the highest in the country. Teen drug use. Drug driving is off the charts, doubled with marijuana-impaired driving. Homelessness is up. Emergency room admissions, and the black market is flourishing. Black market arrests, remember, the whole notion was we legalize it, we can control it.
Right.
Black market arrests are up almost 400%.
All right, Michael, you're a proponent of it, particularly medical marijuana and things that help you feel good.
Yes.
You heard what he just said.
Well, I believe that it has to be regulated, and, having medical marijuana is being very helpful nationally and internationally. We sell our products in South America for epilepsy and Parkinson's, and we show a lot of benefits.
Most people are for medical marijuana. It's when it's recreational. There's a poll out. Should marijuana recreational be legal? This was a Pew poll. 62% say yes, make it legal. 34% say no, it should be illegal.
I think ultimately it will be legal, but again, if it's regulated properly so people get the right product, right? You don't want marijuana laced with fentanyl and some of these other issues.
Absolutely.
So that's one of my
And that's the problem. We are in the throes of an opioid crisis. President Trump just boldly moved forward with an entire new agenda focusing on treatment and prescription of legal opioids because it leads to addiction. Why on earth would we introduce recreationally a brand new drug and open the floodgates, particularly to young people, and big tobacco will take over? Big marijuana will be what big tobacco is today.
I can't tell you how many times we've done segments on pot, and then people write in and say, well, drinking's legal. It's no different than drinking. Is it?
Well, it definitely is different, but again, regulating recreational marijuana. Joe mentioned issues as it relates to opioids, right? Our big push in our company is CBD as opposed to putting people on opioids. So if you can move people against recreational more towards the CBD side where you're not getting high, I think that's going to be a plus.
Well, researchers in California are warning messages about vaping are reaching underage kids through social media. Robert Gray has more.
Juul is known for its popularity among teens. Now a new study shows adolescents are being exposed to the e-cigarette device through social media.
There wasn't any age gate to get on.
A study from the Keck School of Medicine at USC finds underage kids make up 25% of Juul's followers on Twitter.
Juul's posts go out into its followers. Those users, those followers of Juul, then retweet into their own accounts. And the message gets propagated within the social network, ultimately reaching a lot of adolescents in a small time period.
Research shows adolescents exposed to e-cigarette marketing and ads are more likely to use the devices. Study author Dr. John Patrick Allam says it's a public health concern.
Nicotine use during adolescence curbs brain development, and adolescents can become addicted to nicotine via electronic cigarettes, and research has shown that initiation with electronic cigarettes can lead to initiation in combustible cigarettes.
Juul says it's taking actions to prevent and combat underage use. In a statement, the company says it's aggressively worked with social media platforms to remove posts and accounts that portray their product in unauthorized and youth-oriented manners.
Over 600,000 anti-Brexit protesters have gathered to demand a second referendum vote. The march was organised by the People's Vote campaign, who say this protest could be the biggest anti-Brexit action yet. Some people have travelled from all around the country to take part in the rally, and a separate pro-Brexit rally was held in Harrogate in the north of England, led by former UKIP leader Nigel Farage. British Prime Minister Theresa May has dismissed calls for a second referendum on Brexit. However, some MPs have voiced support for the protests. The UK voted to leave the EU by a narrow margin in 2016, with the deadline for London's official divorce from Brussels set for March next year. Well, we'll discuss this further now with Ben Harris-Quinney, who's the chairman of the Conservative UK think tank, the Bow Group. Thanks for coming onto the programme, Ben. This protest that we've seen has been described as the biggest in the UK since the Iraqi war. Will the government take notice now that, I mean, we're looking at nearly 700,000 people protesting and voicing their concerns. Will the government take notice? Will they allow the British public to have their say on the final deal?
Well, firstly, those figures of 600,000 are not what the Metropolitan Police are saying. That's what the organisers of the protest are saying. We know that tens of millions of pounds have flooded in from people like George Soros to fund these kinds of things. But until such a time as in excess of 17.4 million people come out and protest, I think we can assume that Britain's largest exercise in democracy in its history, the EU referendum, still stands.
Does that mean you're dismissing, Ben, does that mean you're dismissing the people who've protested today? Because there's hundreds of...
Absolutely, yes, because a democracy doesn't work in that way. A democracy works on the basis of votes, not on the basis of how many people turn up to certain protests. I mean, we had the last major outpouring of protests in London was actually during Donald Trump's visit, but all polls at the time suggested that the majority of the British people were supportive of the President of the United States being able to visit the United Kingdom. So it's unclear what these protests prove. They prove that if external organisations and individuals like George Soros plough millions of pounds into a campaign, you can get several 100,000 people to turn out. But as I say, we had an exercise in proper democracy, a vote, which occurred just over 2 years ago, and the majority of the British people voted to leave the European Union. So in no way does any protest trump that. And I think my question to those who are calling for a second referendum is exactly how often do they wish to have a referendum on our membership of the European Union? Every year, every 6 months, every month? I mean, it's ludicrous. We've had the people's vote. The people voted, and now it's time for the government to get on with it.
But these people protesting are saying that they had the vote. Yes, it was a narrow win, but they feel that they've been lied to, Ben. Have they got any right to feel like that, do you think? That's why they're on the streets. And, you know, for you to dismiss those thousands and thousands of voices, is that fair to those people?
Well, but those people and people like George Soros are dismissing 17.4 million voices, which, as I say, trump any amount of people that you turn out in a protest, which is not a democratic vote. What I would say to people who feel they've been lied to is that the circumstances of the EU referendum vote was very clear. It was to leave the European Union, to leave the single market, and to leave the customs union. And that's what Brexiteers have continued to campaign for. We haven't had a Brexit government, which David Cameron called for when he left office. We haven't had a Brexiteer Prime Minister. We haven't had a Brexiteer cabinet. And 70% of Parliament is made up of people that voted for Remain. So in terms of implementing what Brexiteers voted for, we would very much like to do that, but we're not in government.
Yeah, and how likely, though, is it, and we have to look at this very quickly, Ben, is it that the UK will leave the EU without any deal whatsoever? Because that wasn't part of the promise, was it?
Well, again, as I say, Brexiteers are not in government, so we are unable to deliver what we set out as our vision during the Brexit referendum. We have a Remainer Prime Minister, we have a 70% Remain cabinet and a 70% Remain parliament. I do think that needs to change, but it won't change before the Article 50 deadline. I think a no-deal Brexit is the most likely because of that circumstance. We haven't been sending negotiators that believe in Brexit, and that's what we need to do. And I think eventually we will get a Brexit-supporting Prime Minister and a Brexit-supporting cabinet, but it's yet to happen.
The left is still so angry over the recent confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh that some are resorting to witchcraft to hurt him. That's right. A coven of witches is gathering in Brooklyn as we speak to place a hex on Justice Kavanaugh in hopes that evil will come his way. Earlier, I spoke with Dakota Bracciale, who is the leader of this occult group. All right, so Dakota, you're a witch.
Yeah.
And you are going to use witchcraft against Justice Kavanaugh.
Yep.
What is the ritual that you are undertaking?
Well, like traditionally in witchcraft, we don't share, most people don't share the exact particulars of the ritual.
Can you give me a hint?
Well, there will be effigies, photos, graveyard dirt, coffin nails, open flames, the whole bit.
Whoa, whoa. So will an effigy of Kavanaugh be burned by the witches?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And a picture of Kavanaugh will be burned?
Yes.
What will you be doing with the graveyard dirt?
So that goes in a container spell, which is basically when you take a jar, fill it with ingredients, seal it, and then burn candles on it. And it's like a continuing spell that you can then re-up on anytime.
Is there a cauldron involved?
Yeah, that's where the fire will be.
Okay.
Yeah.
And has these things worked in the past, these hexes?
Yeah, we feel like they have.
How have you proven that they've worked? And who else have you hexed?
Well, we hexed Trump last summer. We did 3 cumulative rituals. So there was one in June, one in July, one in August. And since then, a lot has come out. I mean, the hex... So a lot of people take it as like hexing is to like make that person die or like do something horrible to them. But it all really depends specifically on like what you're trying to do, right? And that's all in the wording and all in the intention. For us, it's about exposing these people because we believe that they are fundamentally dishonest and fundamentally unethical. And so we want that to be exposed.
Perhaps the Trump hex didn't work because the president is winning over and over again.
Well, I think that depends on how you define winning. On our side of things, we feel that since last summer, we have the Russia probe, which has led to, I mean, how many convictions does it take to figure out that it's not necessarily a victory so far?
So you believe the hex on Trump worked. And now you will be hexing Brett Kavanaugh as well. Are you a peaceful witch? Are you an evil witch? How would you describe yourself?
I don't necessarily ascribe either to myself, because I don't think that anything in our universe or in our world is as cut and dry as good and evil. I don't think that people are fundamentally good or evil. I think that everyone has...
Well, excuse me. Water's world is good.
Oh, really? Okay. That's a relief, I guess. But that also depends on your definition of good. I mean, for example, religiously, right? Like, every religion in the world would have a different definition for what the right action would be. There's some general tenets that most of them adhere to, but I mean, everyone has their different idea of morality and what constitutes a moral action.
Do you think that the witchcraft that you guys are pursuing makes the left and anti-Kavanaugh and anti-Trump people look a little silly?
I really wouldn't mind if it did. I mean, I think, you know, one of the things I do want to make sure that we get to discuss between us is this isn't just about the right. This is absolutely also about the left. I mean, I've said repeatedly...
Oh, well, you know what? You should cast a spell on Hillary Clinton.
I don't really...
She's actually already been cursed.
I don't
Leave
know
her alone. What about Nancy Pelosi?
With my morals, I'm not really about, like, kicking someone while they're already down.
Well, isn't that what Eric Holder wants to do?
I don't know. I kind of feel like with Hillary, she's already not doing too well and needs to maybe just... Maybe a hex of silence would be good, just for a little while.
You're a Bernie bro, aren't you?
No, not
Are you
at
a Bernie
all.
witch?
No, not at all. I like a lot of what Bernie has to say. I don't agree with everything that he has to say.
Okay.
I think that in a lot of ways he will sort of espouse very hard leftist rhetoric and then in practice doesn't actually carry through with it.
Well, for a witch, you know a lot about politics.
You have to.
Dakota, thank you very much. Let's get a look at these rings. Look at these rings and nails, everybody. Could we get a tight shot of that?
Thank you so much.
All right.
Tonight we're getting reaction to another rather interesting move by the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. He's inviting Pope Francis to come visit North Korea, which officially is an atheist country. Let's bring in CNN's Brian Todd. Brian, tell us more about this invitation.
Wolf, Kim's invitation was passed to Pope Francis at the Vatican today by South Korean President Moon Jae-in. This is seen tonight as a cynical and pretty brassy move from a dictator who's got thousands of Christians in labor camps.
In the exalted halls of the Vatican today, an audacious gesture made by a brutal dictator. South Korean President Moon Jae-in telling Pope Francis he had been asked to convey an invitation from Kim Jong-un for the pontiff to visit Pyongyang. The Pope said he'll consider going.
What Kim Jong-un probably intends to get out of this is more good PR for the regime.
Analysts say today's invitation is little more than an extension of Kim's charm offensive, another effort to be seen among the world's great statesmen, following his multiple visits with the South Korean president, with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, and with President Trump.
Excellent relationship. Thank you.
In reality, experts say the North Koreans have always seen religion as a threat. Evangelist Billy Graham did visit North Korea twice in the 1990s, but Kim's grandfather, the founder of North Korea, held himself out as godlike and prevented all other forms of religion.
Religion was exterminated with extreme prejudice over a period of only a few years under Kim Il-sung.
The U.S. government, in a recent report, said Kim's regime's approach to religion is among the most hostile and repressive in the world, quote, known to arrest, torture, imprison, and even execute religious believers. Christians are major targets.
There are defector reports of North Koreans trying to sneak Bibles across the border from China, being caught, lined up, huge fish hooks put through their ears, chained together, and marched off to Yodok camps, to concentration camps, precisely because they were Christian.
And Americans have been swept up. Kenneth Bay was in a labor camp for nearly 2 years, from 2012 to 2014, accused of planning a religious coup.
Fundamentally, it came down to the fact that he was a Christian missionary, and he was basically accused of proselytizing.
Bay said he carried rocks and shoveled coal every day, got very sick, nearly died, and was given no hope.
There's one prosecutor assigned to my case for the last year of my imprisonment. He came to me almost every week and said, "No one remember you. You have been forgotten by people, your governments."
So what message would the Pope be sending if he goes to Pyongyang?
I do see a role for the Pope and for the Vatican in encouraging diplomacy, encouraging peace. I just don't think going to North Korea would be worth that in terms of the message it would send about how the Vatican itself understands the situation on the ground, which is tragic.
Experts say if he does go to Pyongyang, the Pope could at least make a display of calling for more religious freedom and the release of religious prisoners. They say Kim's regime would likely respond with pleasantries, would reiterate that their constitution calls for religious freedom, and then they would promptly do nothing, since the only religion ever really tolerated in North Korea is the cult of Kim Jong-un. Wolf?
It's even more ironic, Brian, considering that Kim's grandfather had religion in his background, right?
That's right, Wolf. Kim Il-sung was raised as a Christian. The Asia Times newspaper says his father was a graduate of a Christian school, and his mother was actually a deaconess in the Presbyterian Church. Kim Il-sung used Christian images to build his own cult of personality, but analysts say to Kim Il-sung it was all about repression and power.
Now to breaking news in that sex abuse scandal rocking the Catholic Church. The U.S. Justice Department has now opened an investigation in Pennsylvania. ABC's David Wright is here with the latest. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Michael. This is believed to be the first time that the federal government has launched a statewide investigation of sexual abuse in the church. Before, so far as we know, they've only looked at cases in individual communities. So this is a significant development.
The federal grand jury issued subpoenas this week to Roman Catholic leaders across Pennsylvania, seeking a trove of sensitive documents and testimony about past abuse cases. Federal prosecutors clearly following up on the work of the Pennsylvania grand jury, which this summer gave the first comprehensive view of abuses going back 70 years.
Priests were raping little boys and girls, and the men of God who were responsible for them not only did nothing, they hid it all for decades.
The statute of limitations had already expired on the vast majority of those cases. What's not yet clear is whether federal charges might apply. The Pennsylvania report is part of a worldwide reckoning over the church's past history of abuse and the massive cover-up that enabled it for years. Here in the U.S., Pennsylvania was the first to take on the issue statewide. Now, a number of other states are following suit. Already, the Pennsylvania report has had a major fallout within the church, prompting the resignation this month of one of America's most prominent Catholic leaders, Cardinal Donald Wuerl of Washington, D.C. U.S. bishops have also launched a nationwide investigation of their own, with the Pope's blessing, with a particular view to holding church leaders accountable for the cover-up.
The U.S. bishops actually wanted the Pope to go even further. They wanted what's called an apostolic visitation. That's kind of like the papal equivalent of a special council. But Pope Francis turned them down. So instead, the bishops are going to be investigating themselves. But you've got at least a dozen states looking into this now, plus this federal probe. This is a big deal.
And possibly more down the road.
Nobody's ever done a nationwide look at it. So that presumably would be what would follow.
All right, thank you so much, Dave.
Now, with the American pastor just freed from captivity in Turkey after being held for 2 years, accused by the Turks of aiding terrorists. Andrew Brunson returned home this weekend thanks to intense pressure from the Trump administration. He'll speak with us in a moment. First, how this pastor became a prisoner. Pastor Andrew Brunson spent more than 20 years in Turkey, running a small church, evangelizing with his wife. But he was arrested back in October 2016. The Turkish government accused him of spying and aiding terrorists, charges he and the U.S. government denied. The president pushed for Brunson's release, and upon his safe return, he welcomed Brunson and his wife to the Oval Office.
Turkish prison to the White House in 24 hours. That's not bad. Actually.
Moved with emotion, Brunson offered to pray for the president.
On President Trump, that you give him supernatural wisdom.
And Pastor Andrew Brunson joins us now. Welcome home.
Thank you. It's very good to be home.
I'll bet it is. That was quite an emotional moment there in the Oval Office. What was going through your mind when you chose to pray for the president?
Well, first of all, my wife and I have prayed for every president, and we've just never had the chance to do it in the Oval Office. Before we went to the Oval Office, we prayed together, my wife and I, and asked that we would have that chance to pray for him. We believe in the power of prayer. And we think this president needs a lot of prayer. Every president does. And so we ask God to give us that opportunity.
You spent 20 years in Turkey, and then October 2016, you were taken prisoner. Did you have a sense of what was happening then?
We were actually shocked. We were arrested on our oldest son's birthday, and this was for deportation. Then we were told that we were being arrested because we were a threat to national security. And within a very short time, it became clear to us that this was unusual. We weren't allowed to see a consular official, and we were kept, my wife and I, for 13 days with no contact with the outside. And it just kept extending and extending. So we were really shocked because we'd spent 23 years telling people about Jesus in Turkey. We did this very openly and had never had a problem with the police.
And just for the record, did you ever engage in any kind of spying, help terrorists in any way?
No, our purpose in going to Turkey was to tell people about Jesus Christ. We did that very openly, and we were not involved in anything political.
You went to prison, came in for some rough treatment.
Well, just being imprisoned is pretty rough. At the beginning, I was held in solitary confinement for a number of days, and that was very difficult. And the way I survived that was by just spending hours in prayer, just to keep my sanity. And then I was kept in a cell for 8 people, but there were over 20 of us there, so it was very crowded. I was very isolated, both by language and by culture, nationality, and also by religion. It was all the people I was with were very strong Muslims. They were all arrested as Muslim terrorists as part of the Gulenist movement. And so it was like living in a mosque in many ways.
Did you ever feel like you were in physical danger?
Not at the beginning. I think that as things were added on, for example, saying that I was supporting the PKK, which is a Kurdish terrorist movement, then of course many Turks would become more angry. At this point, I'm one of the most hated men in Turkey, probably, because I was accused of spying as well as being part of the attempt to overthrow the government and supporting Kurdish terrorists. And then, of course, when they started having economic problems after President Trump imposed sanctions, then I was blamed for the change in the economy.
You're hated in Turkey, but Christians here took up your cause. Did you feel that movement?
Well, this is one of the very surreal things that we're not known people. We're not very important people. We've been working in Turkey in obscurity, one could say, for a number of years. But then around the world, I think millions of people in many countries were praying for us. And even though this caused us a lot of hurt, I think that God is using this, was planning to use this, to bring blessing to Turkey. Now there are millions of people who prayed for Turkey.
And you still love Turkey?
We do, yes.
Pastor Brunson, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Pull over now!
Dropping off Isaiah, and he's on his way back to the house.
Well, he's in so much trouble because him and Isaiah live on the same street.
Then you're gonna block him.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I'm sorry. I just found it.
Call ended.